I don't even. We've only been the attorney for like 8 years. Please plan on unmute only when you are called upon to speak. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, the meeting will be paused until they are resolved. I will now take a roll call of members and guests. I will first take a roll call of those in the room, and then we'll ask you to identify yourself if you're participating on the phone or by Zoom. So Haley Lyons, board chair.
Raul Valdivia, vice chair.
Megan Hartley, board member.
Jason Orm, chair, laws and rules committee.
Jeremiah Lippert, board staff.
Logan Steele, board member.
Jason Robinson, board treasurer. Andrew Barlow, board staff.
Oh, Angie Hunt for legal counsel. Sorry.
Martin Piccioni, executive director.
Wayne Stoddard, board staff.
Sherry McPherson, OSCPA guest, CEO.
Let's go to those on Zoom. Amanda?
Amanda Phils, OAIE guest.
Awesome. And Joe?
Joe Sullivan, board member, and I'll have my camera on in just a bit, everyone. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Anybody else on Zoom? See anyone? Great. Okay, we'll just pause a second. We have Tanya and Adam that are going to join us. So we'll let them get their audio. Oh, there we go. Hey, Adam, can you just say that you're here for the record?
Yep, Adam Applenalp here by Zoom from the OSCPA.
Awesome, your timing is perfect. And Tanya?
Tanya Moffett, BOAC chair.
Thanks, guys. All right, moving on. Agenda review and approval. I don't know of any edits at this point, but please keep in mind that this is going to be the first motion that we need, which means we get to all say our names. And so we will need a motion and a second, and then when we go around and do our voting, it's like a roll call vote.
And Madam Chair, just for the record, before we get into the technical piece of working on the agenda, we may have, there's someone working in my office right now. The board already knows, Heidi Steiner from DAS CHRO. She's gonna join us and observe this board meeting. So she will walk in here in a moment. I just wanted to say that orally on the record because we may not be able to interrupt right when she comes in.
So is there any comments on the agenda? And if not, may I have a motion to approve?
I make it, well, do we need to call out the 11 PM?
We would like to make an amendment to the to the agenda that we do not anticipate the end time to be 11 PM. And so that is an estimate that I think is wildly incorrect.
Yeah.
Don't know that we need to edit it, but yes, for the record, we note that we will not end at 11 PM.
Make a motion to accept the agenda as presented, except for the one correction.
Nice.
We have Jason with the first and Logan with the second. So now we're going to, so we're gonna go around the room. Okay, and do I vote?
Yes.
Okay, I will
So
start.
for the record, it was Jason Robinson.
We have to say the last name.
Yes, we have to
Okay.
say the full names for the record for
Can I get your middle name so we could add this in?
and Logan Steele with the second.
Great. Okay, I'll start. Haley Lyons, aye.
Raul Valdivia, aye.
Megan Hartley, aye.
Logan Steele, aye.
Jason Robinson, aye.
Joe?
Joe Sullivan, aye.
Great, thank you. Motion passed. Good job, guys. All right, so now we have the review of the public board summary. Any corrections or notes there? There's no motion here, since they're minutes, but any comments? Welcome. Hearing none. Well, we're well ahead of schedule already. Public comment time. So are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Please raise your hand in the room or use Zoom raise hand feature. If I call on you for comment, you will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes and staff will unmute you so you can speak. As chair, I reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comment does not pertain to the authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in this state. Seeing no public comments, off we go. Great. Sherry, report of the OSCPA.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and nice weather. It's cooperating as well. So OSCPA, we're very busy with the legislative session right now. And upcoming, getting ready for the CPE season and also New Year startup. Our fiscal year begins April 1st, so we'll have 3 new board members joining and 3 rotating on. And just a reminder, I mentioned before, but our new board liaison will be Megan Kurtz, effective April 1st. And that's because of the transition for our board. And that's pretty much it. And I want to turn things over to Adam for just a moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the board and both Joe and Nikki or Haley for in taking my input and comments, and it's been really an interesting process. And also I really appreciate being at the table, Martin, for all the time you spent talking with me, and Sherry and helping us coordinate on these efforts. So it's been my honor, and I look forward to continuing to work with the board as I progress through the leadership at the OSCPA.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Adam. It's been really great to have your voice around the table as well. So we appreciate you being here and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much. That's our report.
Great. Thank you. Amanda, OAIA?
Hi, thank you. So at the OAI, we had a wrap up to our CPE season, ended up really well. So we were excited, even though it was kind of it was a year without a lot of big transition, big tax changes. So that was good. We were happy with how that finished up. We have our practitioner roundtable coming up in March, which is kind of a mid-season, think about like a mid-season support group to kind of check in on how things are going, kind of lean on each other as needed. And then we also are watching several of the bills that are kind of going through legislation, trying to see where we can support or if we need to offer some comments there. So that's kind of where our focus is at the moment.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. I should ask if anybody has questions for Sherry or Amanda. Okay, so the public agenda has 2 separate executive sessions to kind of help with our discussion flow today. So I'm going to now adjourn to the first executive session. So I'm going to adjourn the public section of the board to enter executive session under authority of ORS 192.660 for N2 for H.
Their application is incomplete based on you have X number of days to complete your application, which obviously they aren't able to do, and then just times out and goes away. And then the other option is to allow them to withdraw their application. Now, none of this sort of fixes that sort of like bigger problem, right? Like there's just no way to like.
Okay, Madam Chair, may I ask for a very brief recess so we can bring people in on Zoom, and if I can bring OSCPA back into the room.
That's great. We're taking a recess.
Angie, the criminal piece is gonna be talked about later.
Sorry, what?
The criminal piece?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Everything okay at school?
We'll see. All back here.
Take your kid's temperature with their own kid-friendly thermometer. That's what school always does. I'm like, don't take your temperature at school. How do they do? They just swipe their.
Oh, I was picturing that.
This thing always reads high. It's like they've jacked it up. So then they're like, oh, temperature.
Well, it's like your kids when they were in like preschool, right? And they would be like, it's 99.6. Like, okay, I think they're gonna survive.
And like slip them a little Tylenol.
Yeah, you like you have a little Tylenol in their pocket. They
Like,
go to work. So.
All right, I think we're all back. So the same persons previously present in public session are present again. So I will not conduct a new roll call. Okay. So the first topic in our work session is private equity and alternative practice structures. We're gonna start on that.
All right, so Madam Chair, for public session on this topic, I think probably the thing that we simply need to deal with is whether we want to go in a direction of having any specific instructions for the LRC at this time, or if essentially the board is in a place where, given what is literally an almost concurrent meeting from AICPA, that's a public meeting in about half an hour on this topic, and promise is that actually you may know a little bit more about in terms of status than I do at the NASPA level to prioritize the private equity discussion. You know, I think the only thing that we can say for sure right now is that we have no idea where the national CPA community is going to land in terms of recommendations around the PEA. And so that makes it kind of pretty difficult for us to kind of figure out what the instructions are, but it's ultimately a board call in terms of, should we tell the LRC to dig in on something, or should we ask them to hold off until we have more clarity?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at the NASBA board meeting, this topic came up and everybody sat around and went, yeah, this is tricky. And then proceeded to like not make eye contact and a little bit moved on. Like it was discussed as like, this is a big thing and we need to like really get some traction on it. But I think that we're sort of deferring, I shouldn't say deferring, but you know, knowing the work that the AICPA is kind of doing, I think that's where we're sort of, everybody's kind of waiting for someone else to do it. Okay.
The presumption first to test, right? And that is the board, we have limited maneuverability in the sense that there's many national firms. And if we have a very different kind of framework here, it's not going to work. Right?
Yeah.
So in many ways, we can't move right now on our own. And it seems like that's reasonable. Any disagreement on that?
No, I mean, I was gonna make the same point of like, we have limitations that seemingly are unique to Oregon. Is that true or not? Because that's my impression, and then
We are, I think it's close. I think we're in a very small, we're not the only state that has a very broad approach to which firms have to register. But my limited understanding is that we are a bit on an outlier in terms of how strict we are in terms of asking firms to register. So it's a very messy scenario when you go out there nationally, because there's already a lot of jurisdictions where there aren't as many strict where there isn't as strict of an environment that in the non-attest space that you have to register your firm, because it depends on other factors like what do you call yourself and what's in your name, right? So there's all kinds of different approaches. We have a much broader umbrella right now. We're not quite the only one, but I think we're in a small minority.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. And then so the second part is to draw a parallel with the debate about 150 versus 120, the 5th year requirement. And the board, through our executive director, had a position that we communicated.
Yeah.
We lobbied for a certain outcome, right? In that national debate.
Yeah.
And it seems to be winning. Great. Do we have a position on APS that we wish to lobby nationally, or do we take a kind of passenger seat approach?
Really good question. What do you think?
I think it's conceivable we might have a position. I'm curious. Yeah. But I think with a test, seems like it's a pretty strong position on our part, right? So that's one's kind of like done, right?
Yeah.
The test, no, you have to have, APS does not work for a test. Or, well, you can't have, non-CPA ownership for a test. But you can't put CPA in the name of your firm. Is one I think we conceivably have a strong position on. Citing tax returns, we might have a strong position on, right? Those are all things that we might say, hey, no, about 50% ownership of non-CPAs. And then I think we might also have agreement on assurance, or consulting side of things, where consulting's fine. You're not a CPA, you do consulting, you can have whatever ownership structure you want, right? So we might have a clear position as a group that we could agree on pretty quickly. I don't know if we tested that yet. And I don't know if this is the right time to do that, but it's an idea.
It is. Yeah, I mean, and yes, I think it is. And Jason, what are your thoughts coming out of LRC, and what's the sense there?
The sense is similar to, I think, what
Well, it was better than what you saw at NASBA, which is let's not make eye contact. It's a little bit better than that. But the sense was, this is really hard.
Yeah.
We don't want to punish people who have already done this, where there are no real rules yet. But there's a real public protection question here with regard to the tax practice. I mentioned that last meeting. You sign public statements all the time, it's what you do for a living. And absolute public protection markets everything else. In my career, I don't know, I may have signed 10,000 tax returns, which is accounts receivable for the US government and state authorities. In fact, add in state returns, I've signed tens of thousands. So is the board's governance of organizations of folks like me part of the public protection that this board thinks is important for the state of Oregon? Or is it okay for Jason and a bunch of other tax nerds to get together, form their own firm, and just go do it?
Yeah.
And then when Jason retires, great, what's happened to his records? All those tax returns with social security numbers and addresses and birth dates, depending upon the return, and kids, what happens to that? Jason responsible? We didn't come to any grand conclusions for the board. But we wanted to bring these questions to the board because I think they're real questions. And to your point, do you want to be at the front edge? Do you want to hang tight and listen to see if anything shakes out nationally? And I can see wisdom in that. But on the flip side, how are you going to answer somebody when I say, hey, I'm Jason, me and my 3 tax partners are going to, kind of do our own thing here. Do we have to be licensed? Well, we do because we're CPAs. But Sherry and her 3 friends, same firm, don't have to be.
Yeah.
And that's just one nuance
That's just one nuance.
of all
So,
the things that we discussed in there.
so very LRC standpoint, very challenging issue. We are happy to get into it. But
Yeah.
what we'd like is just, okay, where are you thinking? Your comments are great. Okay, there's a decision point. Do we hang tight and see what's going to come out of national? And I understand why we might do that. Or do we say, no, we've led in the 120 versus 150. We're going to choose to lead again because that's what's best for Oregon. Just need that direction, Madam Chair, and we'll.
The power is all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal opinion is that I think we should retain oversight over tax firms. And somehow that extends to firms that are not owned by CPAs. If we can, in some way, because I don't know how we're gonna do that, but we currently do not, I mean.
Martin has some ideas, so.
So it's like, if you're performing these services, I mean, you have, in order to sign the returns in Oregon, you have to be one of several things that all have regulators attached to them. And so then how we funnel them into the right buckets such that there is an element of public protection over all of that, because I mean, I hear you, is the federal and state governments, are they members of the public we're trying to protect? And also, I mean, I just think about, people trying to get their tax returns done and relying on us to do them correctly. And it's like, it's just a really important function. Other thoughts?
I think right now, in light of that, how soon some of these meetings are happening, I think it'd be better for us to just wait, hold for a little bit. And if we see something spectacular come out of any of those sessions, we can
Yeah.
hold a special board meeting as
So-
such, and then tell Jason, we'd like you to move in this direction.
So we will, I mean, we meet again in May and
June 5th.
June 5. Between now and then, we will have the outcome from today's meeting.
Yeah.
And potentially others. We will have another NASDA board meeting, which is at the end of April.
Ah.
And so I think that, you know, from the NASDA board side, I think there was a little bit of like, this is definitely gonna be a big topic in April. Because UAA and all the things will be settled, will be sorted out to some degree. So I mean, I think we should wait also. I mean, I do think we probably have a position, if we were to say we have to take a position today, I imagine we could come up with one that we had consensus on. But then how we execute that vision, I think could be very tricky.
Mhm.
Are there opportunities that we'll be losing to out the lobby, you know, before that June meeting?
I don't think
On the
so.
legislative concept side. I think it's what,
Oh, on the legislative concept side, I don't think we could get,
Yeah,
And not,
if you're asking specifically about the legislative session, I would feel comfortable looking the board in the eye and say it is way too late to build anything for
Oh, sorry,
this.
no, I mean in terms of like NASPA,
the AICPA.
AICPA side of things, like.
No, I don't think so, because I think that whatever comes out of whatever, I mean, the thing that's interesting about the makeup, I think that's interesting about the makeup of the NASB board is there are several board members that are in alternative practice structures, either recently or, you know, have been for a long time. And so there will be lots of
Yeah.
input on, you know, and so like the conversation about like, oh, well, can't your, you know, can your PE owners influence the test partners to do whatever because they have holdings in these other businesses, and they all say, but they don't. There's no safeguards for it, but they don't. And so really getting down to kind of those brass tacks details, I think having those folks that are in those alternative practice structures will be helpful though in navigating.
I think it's really important for the board to also hear very clearly that there are very different components to this conversation. So far, at least in Oregon here with this board, we've really focused primarily in our discussions, whether it's at the board level or at the LRC level, around what we should or shouldn't regulate, whether firms should or shouldn't be required, how does this activity fit into our current framework. There is a whole other bucket that we have discussed very little so far, right? And I suspect it's actually the bucket that the AICPA Peak Committee that's meeting in a few minutes will focus on, which is all independence issues that are raised by these APS structures, right? We haven't discussed them here yet very much at the board and at the LRC level, right? But I actually suspect that it could turn out that there might be two railways in town. There might be a railway that I will simply call, in my simplistic ways of trying to understand that, the AICPA Peak Railway that may focus more on the independence side of the discussion topic. And I could envision that once NASBA has enough air post the 150, 120 discussion, that they might take a little bit of a different tack and focus a little bit more around the registration piece. I don't know if that's true or not, but those are two different conversations that ultimately all relate to that APS PE piece. So I'm not convinced, I want to be really clear, that the peak piece is going to help us a lot with some of the fundamental stuff that we're discussing here, but it could help us a great deal with respect to the decision that you asked for, Logan, and I love the way you phrased it of, do we, for example, on the independent side, do we feel comfortable saying, oh yeah, this seems very thoughtful, we're comfortable being a passenger, we don't need to get ahead of that conversation. And I could see us taking a different approach on the other aspect of the APS PE, because those are really, even though they relate to ultimately the same issue, those are pretty different conversations in my view. And I just want to make sure that the board knows that there is really two really large buckets ultimately that we're going to have to work through when it comes to this APS PE stuff, even though we focused on mostly one so far.
It sounds like wait and see. Yes.
See. Any objections to wait and see?
All right, so back up in June.
Yep. I mean, I think it's gotta be a standing item.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Until-
and then the only asterisk that would have for that is the big unknown is the peak committee, for example, on the independent side, gonna come up with an exposure draft
Right. That we have to
piece that would
respond to.
require a response before we meet in June.
Right.
Right, so I think that, quite frankly, I'm gonna have to have some discussions with Haley about, do we need to pull together a special meeting just to deal with this exposure draft if it rises to that level, so that we can be heard if there is something that actually comes out of that peak process. So, but we don't know that for sure because they tried once before and they couldn't agree. And, we don't know whether today is gonna be better.
And peak, if people do not know, is the Professional Ethics Executive Committee. Because I can never remember what the letters stand for. Okay, moving on. National update. So now's the board, the highlight of the hot topic of the meeting was certainly the ULA process. Comments are expected to be released to the general public around February 14th. There was an option when people commented to request for specific information to be redacted. So they're going through the process of redacting whatever people said they wanted redacted and digesting all of the information. The comments will be fully released, is my understanding. There's been a lot of scrutiny towards NASBA for lack of transparency and the AICPA, both. And so the release of the comments in full is very important in kind of hoping to regain the fact that there is no sort of side dealings going on. Although there's always side dealings going on, but all the comments will be released. At this point, the tone seems to be really consistent with what our response was. And so the UAA committee, Joint Committee of NASBA and AICPA are having some difficult conversations about what the next steps are. I do think that, Logan, as you identified, that with what we're seeing in terms of number of jurisdictions who have either bills that have already dropped in their legislatures or that we anticipate will, the number is high. And, moving towards that bachelor's degree plus experience component is an outcome that I think we're going to see. So, which is great, super exciting. There was definitely a tone of like, yep, that's probably where we're headed, which I was really refreshed by. The other thing I will say about NASBA is that the organization is going through a significant organizational review with an outside consultant. And so currently have solicited feedback from all board members and will reach out to both the executive director and the board chair from all 55 jurisdictions to get input and feedback on, how to be better, do better, all of the things. So Martin will be asked to participate in that. I'm wondering, Joe, if you would be willing, because I've already participated as the board chair, but I'm wondering, Joe, if you wouldn't be willing to be the board chair proxy for that process and just give them your feedback.
Happy to. Yeah, would that be awkward for you since you're going to be there?
No, I'm not going to be there. It's
Well, I mean, being on NASBA board and
No.
the board chair, I guess, yeah.
No, not at all. I will suggest it. I don't know if they'll take me up on it, but it's like, the idea is the more feedback, the better. And being a new board chair, I gave my perspective already, but I think it would be helpful to have your input as well. So there will be an effort to get, there's a potential for 110 more respondents, and then they will do an executive, they have identified people within the NASBA organization. And so far with just the board feedback, there's like 126 pages of documentation. The guy who's running is really great. I was really impressed with his follow-up questions and kind of really trying to drill into what could be better or different or all of that. So if I could toss your name in the hat, that would be awesome.
Yeah, perfect. Happy to help.
Great. So you will also be participating as well.
Okay.
Great.
You seem sad.
All
But
right.
I mean, and I will just say that, and I will ask you both to do
Yeah,
the same. I
I'm-
was completely uncensored. I mean, there was no,
What I'll simply say in a public meeting is that clarity has value.
so I think that's an exciting, I think that's great how that process is moving along. Martin, do you want to talk more about the UAA process?
A little bit.
Okay.
So there's really two things here under item B2, UAA process update and update on CPA pathways, mobility bills filed. I really should have split these two up into two separate sections. I'll start with the UAA process. And I think the best thing to do for me in public session is to simply say what we know factually is that the UAA process has come to at least a temporary halt, that the last meeting that was scheduled for January 30th was canceled from the AICPA side. I personally will go as far in public session is that even though there is a lot of chatter about why that happens, I like I like being a positive person and simply acknowledge that AICPA is going through a massive transition at the leadership level. And it is in that context alone for me, not inappropriate for the AICPA portion of the UA to try to step back and figure out what their new direction is from AICPA leadership. I will also acknowledge that that message that you just heard from me is probably not the message that you would hear from a lot of NASBA folks right now, because they're pretty upset about the cancellation of that UAA process. I think the takeaway for the board here simply is that it's a very, very sensitive phase. And I would go one step further and say, actually, this week, from where I sit, is probably one of the most critical ones all year, because this happens to be the week where there is a what they call a council meeting, I believe, between summit. Yes, thank you. Sorry, there's too many names out there.
Task
There's
force,
a
summit,
summit
council.
between AICPA and NASBA scheduled for this week.
Do you know who goes to that?
I don't really know who's in the room on this, but essentially from what I'm hearing from my sources, this is essentially the big kahunas talking to each other on both sides. If with what Haley just described, right, what we know is that there's been at least some motion in a positive direction at the last NASBA board meeting, right? So that alone would make me hopeful that if there are adults in the room this week, that we could actually finally get to the place that we haven't been able to get to, which is to come to some kind of a consensus position, right? I still think that that's a possibility, right? But there's also a lot of kind of still kindergarten behavior out there of finger pointing about why did this get canceled and why is this, this entity raising that position or the other. So I'm hoping that that chatter dies down and that folks realize that, and this does overlap essentially with the second part here on the bills that are filed, right? We are extremely late in this process. As of yesterday, because yesterday Illinois just dropped its legislation, we now have at least 11 jurisdictions that have dropped legislation already where we know it for a fact, right? And, what I'm hearing is that expectations are well north of 30 jurisdictions doing something this year, right? Whether they will succeed or not is a whole other matter. Whether all of them will really move or not is really another matter, right? But there is a lot of motion. What does that mean? We're looking at, from a UAA standpoint, the cats are like, the cows are way out of the barn already. And if we don't do something fast at the national level, we're going to end up with model law that is not aligning at a most fundamental level with where the profession is actually going. So we're already in massive catch-up mode. So really this week is probably, I think, one of the most critical at the national level for the profession, because if they don't get it together this week, I don't see a way for there to be a national alignment in time before, when you look at the pieces that you have in your supplements, where it has this Excel sheet PDF overview of the other states, right? One of the commonalities that you see there is that the effective dates of those pieces of legislation are all around, or at least with very few exceptions, all around January 1, 2026. It's a date you really need to mark in red on our calendar, right? Because that's basically the latest date by which this profession still has a chance to line up what our go-to is nationally with where jurisdictions are moving, right? So that's kind of where we are. We're kind of on the precipice of pulling this out just in time, kind of almost like snatching victory from the jaws of defeat that has been building for years, and kind of getting it right just in time, or potentially going down unprecedented roads where there is a split. We may see worst case scenario, an AICPA only exposure draft, and kind of a real split in the profession. I hope that that does not happen. I hope we stay together. But that's kind of my most honest assessment of where we're at in terms of the UAA process. It's too early to give up hope, but we are right at the precipice.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely heard Dan Dustin say January 1, 2026, that's our date. We've got to get something. I mean, so certainly the NASBA side is very clear on everything could be broken by then if we don't figure out what we're doing.
So that's I think the most honest thing that I can say in public session. And beyond that, I'm happy to answer questions around the bills filed. I know it's complex. We know for sure that there's those 11. There's a lot of debate around commonalities and differences. They're not all exactly the same, but at the most fundamental level, there is an incredible amount of overlap between those bills, because either they're strictly on the mobility side, and if so, on the mobility side, which is actually a great kind of a little bit of a heads up to a discussion we're about to have, a couple of agenda items later, right? If you look at it from how are jurisdictions proposing to protect CPA mobility, right? There is clearly so far, based on the bills that have dropped, it is a true statement to say that there are far more jurisdictions choosing the more, if you will, radical approach of open mobility rather than a substantial equivalency-based approach toward protecting CPA mobility, right? Beyond that, there is from my perspective, encouraging amount of similarity that really, if those bills touch licensing pathways, what they all have in common is that they're essentially allowing a bachelor's +2 pathway. That's kind of the fundamental thing, which also then ties back to the report out that Haley just gave from the NASBA board, is that the NASBA board is essentially shifted pretty significantly in its position, which up until this board meeting was, we're only supporting the A+2 if it's part of this competency-based pathway, part of this competency-based model. And essentially they've said that's not going to happen anymore based on the feedback to the exposure drafts, right? So that's the part that gives me hope that there is both that shift in an NASBA position and a relative level of alignment on that fundamental issue between the bills that have dropped in the jurisdictions. So that's the national environment. Questions?
Can we take a 9-minute break? I would like to take a 9-minute break, and we're gonna do that now, and we come back at 10 o'clock.
Even without the gavel, it's the test.
All right,
with your kid?
we're recessing for 9 minutes.
Yeah.
We
That's
do have,
awesome.
we do have.
Yeah. Yeah, so they all have to file by the end of February. So yeah, this is like our busiest time, it's January, February. Oh, no, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay.
When specifically since that 31 deadline?
I mean, it depends on your large accelerated filer, but most file by the 28th.
And we're back. Do you have to do anything to be back? We are resuming our meeting
Yes, we're
at 10:06, much later than planned.
full meeting, and I think we should probably say we still have the same people.
We still have the
as we
same
did
people
before.
here. Yep.
So no roll calls. Actually, the one exception is
Heidi had to.
Oh, yeah.
Heidi Steiner stepped out, and I think she has a meeting coming up, so she will not join us for a while. All right, do you want me to cover the legislative session stuff real quick? So folks, if you haven't, probably unless you've focused really hard on your work in your CPA firm, you may not have realized it, but the Oregon legislature is now in session. And we are starting to get busy. So we actually ended up already having an appearance in the legislature. This was a bit of a, this was not exactly the plan, but I want to just say that OSCPA did us a very nice favor by, in addition to our agency bills, so you may recall we have two bills. There's the bill on the accounting scholarships, and there's the Public Accountancy Act update that also has the pathways, the mobility, the inactive status, and the board composition changes and all that. We have our two bills, right? But OSCPA was very kind to us, and also via their connection and the kindness of Senator Meek, introduced two backup bills, Senate Bills 103 and 113. In Senator Meek's committee, the Committee on Senate Finance and Senate Committee on Finance and Revenue. And essentially those bills actually had what I would call basically a courtesy hearing at this point. And we all showed up. So Sherry showed up, and John Hawkins from OSCPA testified, and I testified. It was a little bit of a, kind of an interesting thing, because we kind of had to point to, hey, there's this other bill over here, and this is not really interfering with the other bills, but it does give us, quite frankly, it was a great way to showcase that we have a really unified coalition and are blessed by, quite frankly, the fact that even though the agency has been doing a lot of this work under agency leadership, that we get things that normally agencies never get. It does not happen a lot that agencies have backup bills from their association just in case bad things happen. And by the way, this is not a small insurance policy, because as I learned, as we were kind of talking to each other and I learned more about what this really does, one of the things that these hearings did for us is not just that we were able to get our message out there, but because of the type of committee that it is, the normal rules of the legislative process don't apply. And without getting into the nitty-gritties of how legislative sausage is made, simply know that at a super high level, normally bills have to go, we have two chambers, House and Senate, right? And normally it means that there are specific deadlines that apply for a bill to stay alive. So if you start on the House side, you only have so much time before your bill has to be through that chamber out of committee before it needs to arrive in the Senate chamber to stay alive, and vice versa, right? These two bills that are essentially backup bills that are essentially contain partial copies of a sections of our agency request bill essentially are now, if you will, a free insurance policy. And if you've watched insurance prices lately, the words free and insurance are not in the same sentence, right? And literally, because those two bills are exempt from any of those deadlines because of the committee that they were heard in. So if something really goes sideways on our bills, we now have, thanks to the efforts of the society, have essentially now a backup insurance plan that is now live. It is essentially, you have to have a hearing on the bill. Without that, it doesn't work, right? We had the hearings on those two backup bills, so now we have essentially an extra insurance policy, right? The plan is still, and I had a conversation with Senator Taylor. Senator Taylor is key because she was a member of that committee, but she also chairs the Senate Committee on Labor and Business. So she's the chair of the committee, as opposed to that where our substantive bill currently sits and where we hopefully should get a hearing very shortly. I will double check during the meeting if I get any updates from the committees that I can still announce during this meeting. And I met with her last week, and she's super happy to kind of help us out, loves our work. I also ended up meeting with him, who is the Senate Republican leader, who is also important to us because he also sits as vice chair of the Senate Committee on Finance, Senate Committee on Labor and Business. So, and that was also a great meeting. So I'm very encouraged just by the two substantive meetings that I had with the chair and vice chair, both the Democrat and the Republican, on the Committee on Labor and Business. So I do think it'll be pretty smooth sailing. For us, I'm a little bit impatient right now that I don't quite have a hearing date yet. So you see me fumbling. It's usually me checking on the status and refreshing the legislative information system once every 30 minutes. So that's kind of where we are. In addition to that, what I actually should have also put on, oh, wait a minute, there it is, it's right here. We also have a budget hearing. So we have a separate, state agencies get their own budget bill, right? I don't know if you know this about the Board of Accountancy, but maybe because we start with the letter A or something, but we always get the coolest budget bill numbers. We go either Senate Bill 5501, which is always the first bill in the budget series, or if we start on the House side, we're House Bill 5001, and that's actually what's happening this session. So we always are kind of the cool kids on the block with our bill numbers.
So you're gonna say it was like bill number 1040 or something like that?
Yeah, right.
The rest of us might have thought that was.
Right.
I leave that to the restroom code at OSCPA.
Yeah.
So we have our budget hearing scheduled for Wednesday next week, February 12th at 8 a.m. Haley so far is the only one on the board that has been victimized as in being presented with a draft set of budget slides that I have to finalize by tomorrow. I'm at the very tail end of pulling together what's called our official governor's request budget binder that also has to be present in the legislature for that stuff. So there's a lot going on right now. That is moving. I have an informal commitment, but not yet a formal, it is scheduled, from the Senate Committee on Education that our accounting scholarship bill is supposed to be scheduled for hearing at 8 a.m. Monday morning. So this upcoming Monday morning. I have been in touch with, and we can talk if we want others there as well, but I have a commitment from our pipeline committee chair, Dr. Elizabeth Almer, that she will be down and help us with testimony for that bill. Logan, you're welcome to come if you would like.
What time was that again?
8 a.m. Monday morning, 8 a.m. Monday morning, but I'll let you know when it's confirmed. I'm nervous that it's not public yet, but there is kind of encouraging emails from the committee staff that that's happening. That also means, quite frankly, there's a lot of legislative visits that have to happen between now and next Wednesday, because it will be good to visit with the folks on the education committee. We're kind of spread out, right? We had a hearing in finance and revenue, the accounting bill in our education committee, the main bill is in labor and business. So we're a lot more spread out all over the committees than we normally are, which is, the downside of that is it's a lot more work, right? The upside is we get our message out much more broadly than we normally do. And I'm actually really excited about that because we have a lot of really good things to say. right? And there's also overlap, what I call the overlap benefit, because some of those folks I'm gonna have to meet with also sit on Ways and Means, right? And that means that they will both get to see this time, this is different for us, right? Ways and Means for us normally is only relevant to the budget bill. Not so this time, right? Because our accounting scholarship bill also has to go through the Ways and Means process. And so we have a lot more visibility than normal in Ways and Means, and we have a more unusual proposal than we normally do, because this is not just a sleepy agency budget, but this thing about, you know, spending Board of Accountancy funds on accounting scholarships. It's raising eyebrows. No, it's mostly in a good way, right? People are like, wow, you know, this is cool stuff, but people are paying attention to what we're doing in a good way, right? So the fact that we are actually spread out in these committees and that there's overlap between the members of those committees and who's actually sitting on Ways and Means is actually a really good thing for us. So that's kind of where things are for us at this point. Any questions on that?
For the scholarship bill, I have a NASBA board meeting at 8 that day. So
8 a.m. Pacific?
Mhm.
Ooh, well,
So,
lucky you.
so if Elizabeth is gonna be there, then.
You don't need to be.
Okay.
You don't need to be, but Logan, if you can be the board representative, and then we can have also an OSU, and I know she's there for the whole thing, not as a PSU person per se, but it's always lovely if we have some present as well. But I will confirm before you
actually
start
happens.
moving things around on your calendar. I want to make sure that this is real and not just we thought we were going to do this, but now it's really on blah, blah. So stay tuned if you're willing. So that will be amazing, because I know you've been pretty excited about the pipeline work, and it'll be great to have you there with a board hat on. All right. Any other questions before I move on to the last legislative update? Okay. So I do need to at least very briefly bring up, every legislative session, something happens that falls in the category of surprises, kind of like it's the category where you never really know what a legislative session brings. Usually those surprises simply come from legislators. It is less common that surprises come from colleague state agencies. Unfortunately, this time we were not spared that. So it turned out that our colleagues from the Department of Revenue dropped a bill that I found out about the day before the hearing that is extremely well-intentioned. It's essentially a bill that apparently grew out of a whole bunch of discussions with governor's office and scandals around businesses not paying their taxes while at the same time getting licenses renewed from the state without problems, even though they were, significantly arrears in taxes. And essentially the bill is attempting to create a mechanism that is much broader now. That's not just about vendors and businesses, but also about licensed professions. And essentially with an approach that says, once, a certain threshold in any given profession is exceeded of folks that DOR considers non-compliant, there's a pretty complex mechanism that would kick in under this bill that would essentially require that every single licensee of that licensing board obtain a certificate from the Department of Revenue that they would need in order to be able to complete any licensure process. So whether it's a renewal, whether it's an initial application, it essentially would require, if essentially a trigger is reached and DOR pulls the trigger on a particular profession or a particular licensed profession, it would essentially require a different type of renewal process that requires essentially cooperation and documentation from DOR to complete the process, right? Unfortunately, DOR did not communicate with the agencies so affected until that kind of hearing and the bill became public. And essentially it was Friday last week. It seems like a long time ago, but it was only like 2 business days ago, I think, that DOR started sitting down with its first meeting with licensing agencies to try to explain the bill and answer questions and concerns. So in a way, you know, I know they're well-intentioned. I raised some flags internally. I had a very nice conversation with the head of DOR, Betsy Imholt, Saturday a week ago, so about 10 days ago by now, where she explained kind of what the intent is behind the bill. She was very gracious. She apologized for the fact that DOR hadn't been consulting, right? But now there's a really big question in the room on where does this bill go from here? Because effectively you're looking at an agency request bill that to me could be easiest with this board explained as the anti-LRC bill. Essentially, they're starting the process now of what our LRC does, even though there's already been a hearing on the bill, right? Which creates a lot of issues in terms of either it means that there is a very compressed period of time where they try to fix certain aspects of this bill, or this bill gets kicked over into some kind of a work group process where essentially the legislature says, hey, work out these details and come back next session. We don't know yet where that's gonna go. I did on, so I feel I can say publicly now, because that email trail concluded yesterday, is that I also offered DOR assistance if they wanted it to take a little bit of a different approach to this bill to accomplish the same policy objectives, but do it in a way that hopefully will be a lot easier, not just for the boards, but also quite frankly, get them results a lot sooner than this bill currently would provide. And so I have a meeting actually set up with DOR Friday in a week from now. I think that whatever that is, the 18th or the 19th, whatever the Friday is, to give them some internal consultation. Doesn't mean that they will take any advice that I give them, but I'm gonna try to be as collegial and collaborative and hopefully find a way to navigate that, you know, the DOR and the governor's office care about the objectives of the bill and hopefully help them get it done in such a way that maybe the how of how they're trying to accomplish it is less intricate and burdensome on the licensing boards and the professions that could be affected. So that's kind of where we are on that Senate Bill 800 stuff. Any questions around that? All right, then we are on to the easy topic. Do you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
We have to keep right on rolling.
Well, actually, I wanna take a quick water break. So how about this? I'm going to,
So I can.
do you want to just
Sure.
set the discussion for a minute?
Yeah, so the next item is a little friendly amendment to our Bill 797. Angie has a memo in the file, but if you want to just give a quickie overview, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so basically we just looking at our existing statutory language as it is right now, when we look at what we have for substantial equivalency, we have the, you know, the 150+1 in our definition of substantial equivalency. And our statute, the way it is, it's in the definition section. And I think if you go to most other states, it's not in the definition section. And it took me a while to sort of parse out why that is. And I finally figured it out, like this, I think. I figured it out. Is that the reason why we do it that way is because our experience requirements, when you're applying for initial licensure in Oregon, you as the CPA have to, you have to get supervisor sign off on your experience requirements. Whereas in most other states, that is not a requirement. So the licensee attests to their experience requirements in in other states, they attest to it. Whereas here, you have to get supervisor sign off on your experience to get an initial license. So I think that's why we have it the way that we do. We left it in the definition part. And then in the process of just like looking at like, you know, what we draft and what Ledge Council drafts, and there's just differences, and like they have all their requirements of the way that things go, and the way that they have to write things on top of the fact of like, this is a definition, so you're putting a definition within a definition potentially, right? Which makes it all very like odd and it's hard to write. So basically what ended up happening was what we got is just like, it is sort of like confusing in the respect that it's sort of repetitive, and it like kind of like says the same thing. And then one part it's parsed out and the other part it's not. And you know, that's just kind of where we ended up. The other sort of thing that happened was that, so like I said, in our existing statutes, the language has that in basically saying like, if you are an individual that is qualified on your own accord, right? You have and I'm just going to base it on what we currently have right now. So, right, you have 150 credits and your year of experience. If you have that on your own, but you didn't need that to get your license, you can still come here and work, right, without having to get a license here. So basically, like you on your own accord came up with that. So this affects nothing else than those instances, right? So you have the instances, like if you're coming here and wanting to get a reciprocity license, this doesn't affect that. If you want to come here and you're getting an initial license, you're coming here from another country, we have our own in the statute, it says, well, you have to do that, right? Like in there, it's like the supervisor stuff, and I don't know what it is in reciprocity off the top of my head, but it's in there, right? So this literally only deals with like, Haley lives in Washington. She on her own, her state where she ever got her license from didn't require 150+1, but she wants to still come here on this, you know, be able to come and work here without having to have a license here. And she like, so I'm like, I struggled for a while, like even figure out an example where it could come out. So I guess in theory, right? So Haley comes here and she's got that experience, but her state didn't have that requirement. So she just had it on her own. Somebody complains about Haley, you look it up and you think, oh, in theory, should you not have been practicing here, right? Because your initial state didn't have those requirements. So then you'd have to go and look to see whether or not Haley had those requirements. So, does that make sense? That's like, so that's the issue, right? Like, so by taking out, we didn't put in that language again that says what it currently says in our statute, that an individual has the qualifications specified in paragraph A of the subsection, holds a valid license as a certified public accountant from another state that does not require an individual to have the qualifications specified in paragraph A of the subsection as a condition of licensure as a certified public accountant. So that's what it says right now. We did not put that back in this one. So, right, like this one just talks about like, you know, these are the various things that your state, like the ways of licensure, like we were very focused on, like, these are the pathways to licensure. And what this person has pointed out is that, like, in theory, right, if this happens, this person wouldn't have mobility. So the likelihood of like, you know, the only way this is going to come up, right, is that if that pathway happens, right, that somebody was out of state, got a license, that state didn't require it. They came here, practiced on mobility, and then there was a complaint filed. That's sort of like the nutshell. So is it in our statute now? Yes. Can you add it back in? Yes. And I gave you like different pathways of ways that we could put it back in. There's also the option of not putting it back in. So now it is up for you to decide.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Angie, there's really fundamentally the first decision that we need to make here is the friendly concern that comes up, a friendly corner that basically said, hey, you know, this language could be a little bit confusing, right? I know, and I hope that doesn't violate privilege when I simply paraphrase, you know, what you and I talked about by phone, right? But you used words kind of very close to really, at the end of the day, the language that we have in Senate Bill 797 right now is we can make it work as is. It's not 100% perfect. The concern is not entirely misplaced, but it may not arise to the level of needing to amend it. So the first judgment call is, how strong does the board feel about kind of the level of deficiency that's been identified here and whether we want to amend it, right? Because it does create a little bit of a process issue where we then have to do that, but it's better to do it now than to do it later. And then if the board decides, you know what, yeah, we do want to fix it, right? Here are the 4 options that you laid out in this memo. I also want to just be really clear that from a process, so that's a substantive decision we need to make. Number 1, do we want to amend, and if so, with which one of the 4? Process-wise, there was a really deliberate decision made here that you can essentially connect to the arc of history of we've worked for 18 months through board processes and the LRC process to make sure we have everybody at the table at Senate Bill 797. So we wanted to create an environment here where in a very public forum with OAIA present, OSCPA present, that we talk through whether we need an amendment to this bill or not, so we can make sure that everybody stays comfortable and unified with whatever we come up with today. And kind of continue to lead with respect to our discussions are open, we're transparent, there's no secrets. If we change course, everybody knows why, and hopefully stays on board. So that's the process part that I just wanted to put out there very clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear from Jason and Sherry or Adam. It looks like Amanda maybe had to drop off, but on any thoughts around this. Amendment,
Have you guys discussed this at all, OSCPA side?
Our board hasn't.
Yeah.
Because of that, but I guess I would just say that, and not speaking for the board, but just generally speaking, you know, we don't philosophically want to have obstacles or problems in the way. I feel like, you know, the board has discussed topics enough that I can very comfortably say that. We want to make sure that there's ease in people being able to come into the state through reciprocity and mobility, be able to become licensed here initially. Does that help you?
Yeah, and from what I understand from Angie's descriptions, that literally 99% of those scenarios are covered, and we're dealing with essentially an outlier scenario where there is a little bit of a lack of clarity under the existing language, right? That's caused some concerns, right? And is that fixable short of an amendment, or do we fix it with an amendment? Is really kind of the issue with respect to that subset there. So I hope that makes it clear very publicly that we're talking about an outlier scenario here, not about there is a generic problem with the language that we've come up with across the board.
I would just add, so I agree with Sherry, like, you know, we want to make it, we want to reduce the barriers to out-of-state licensees becoming licensed in Oregon. And I think it makes sense to do whatever, you know, is appropriate to do that. My only question is, like, is this something that could be accomplished in rule, or that no? Okay. Angie says no. Okay. Then I'm sure you already thought of that.
So this doesn't actually affect people getting licensed in Oregon, right? It's just a mobility.
This is just a mobility issue for a very small subsection of folks that may want to come in under mobility.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, then I mean, I mean, personally, I would support it. Again, I can't probably speak for the whole society board since we haven't discussed it, but I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's really aligned with what we've been saying, which is, you know, we're embracing mobility and sort of, you know, whatever we can do to ease the barriers to practicing in our state is helpful.
Seem that it would be better to clean it up now than to come back.
Yeah.
I mean, and Angie, shake your head no if it.
No, it's just such an interesting thing, because you know, I think what ended up happening in the past, I think on this language that's currently existing in the statute, was that people would get so confused by it because of our initial licensing is different. It's, you know, and so you know, honestly, it's one of those things where it is such a, you know, so far it probably would never come up, but again, right, it makes sense to just I mean, I don't know how hard it is to do a friendly amendment, you know, but yeah, if you can get it in now.
I don't think it's super hard to do an amendment. I think this is where it gets a little Okay, how do I say this? Depending on which one of the four options we choose, it might help if it's not us requesting the amendment, but that we might ask the society for help getting an amendment in. That's about as far as I want to go in public session. So I'll take one more step. If you look at the range of options, right, they're like basically on a scale, right? Option one is kind of like, if you will, and please correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth that make you cringe, is essentially the most minimalist correction. And option four is kind of like the most, if you will, maximalist correction. And you'd be forgiven if you had some form of flashback occurring, you know, as the LRC side and including also on the board side, because you will probably notice that when you go back to option four, right, that it actually is a lot closer to some of the initial proposals that we started out with, but we essentially were then whittled away in the review process. Once an agency puts in its requested language. So the fix in, and not that I want to overemphasize option four, but I want to just connect the dots really clearly. The proposed fix that council wrote up in option four is actually pretty close to a language model that we discussed back in the fall, but we're not able to get through the review process, which means that quite frankly, I think that if that's where the board's heart is, because that's also the option that gets us a lot closer to, if you will, open mobility language, right? That's the option that gets us the closest to where most other states are moving with their legislation, right? I am not so sure where we end up with our chances of getting that amendment drafted that way if the agency requests it, and our chances are higher if that's where the board's heart is at, to ask the society to be the one asking for a friendly amendment through one of its legislative contacts. Because at that point, then the request would not be coming from an agency, but from a legislator, and it creates a little bit of a different dynamic. That's probably what I would simply say about that in public session. So that's not meant to steer you on the substance, but I just want to be really clear about, here's the range. Option four is something you probably recognize. It's closer to what we originally wanted, but we got a lot of pushback on it. But if that's really where heart is at, we can certainly try to do it now via the amendment process, via the society. If that's, you know,
what's the worst that could happen? The amendment is denied and we are just.
Do they get upset and they drop the bill?
Sorry, what?
Right, or do they get upset and drop the bill? Like,
That's the worst that could happen.
that is that the, okay.
One second, I just want to announce that Amanda came back into the meeting.
Oh, awesome, thank you.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, right, I mean, is that an outcome? That's a with like real possibility?
Usually what happens is that because it's an agency request bill, they wouldn't just drop the bill, right? It would be an issue of, do we get the amendment or not, right? So for me, it's actually, I will go as far as saying, I think it's absolutely worth trying to get what the board wants to get, because if we don't get anywhere with the amendment, we have essentially what we end up with is a product that is 99% perfect and deals with 99% of the scenarios that we want. And essentially, do we want to take a shot at cleaning up the remaining 1%? And if the amendment doesn't fly, we still have a bill that works for 99% of scenarios, right? So to me, it's worth trying.
Where you don't want to be, just thinking, you don't want to be that individual that ends up being that 1%, right? Through unintended situation.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's where it hits a real human part, right?
Yeah.
It becomes could potentially become a case for the board. You know, can drag a firm in, the licensee, a lot of anguish. I'd rather work at things and see what we could do than not. And you know, how we find ourselves at this, I feel very confident in saying, you know, we were well intentioned, things happen, you know, and to that point, a lot there's been a lot of water under the bridge nationally since we started, you know, and I feel very confident about the excellent efforts that so many people have made in Oregon, which has got us to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think option 4, I mean, that was the original, kind of the original plan. And so if we can get back to that, I would definitely, I mean, that would be where my interest would lie.
Is there a way, Martin, they can like say, basically like work with one of these three, like basically be like, they're okay with all three options, whatever works out for you, or do you want them to specifically like, because my only fear is if they say go option 4, I know there's 4 options, so let's just take option 1 off the table. Let's just talk through 2 through 4. If they say go with this one, then you're stuck with this one, right? Like versus if you need to walk it back and like be like, we're actually fine, as long as this language gets in there that says that you licensee can come in with your stuff, like that's the goal, right? So like how it gets there.
Let me ask this question before you answer that. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
So instead of approving one of the options, we approve an amendment.
Right.
Yeah, so let me ask this.
That's fine.
Is anybody thinking that they would prefer we do nothing? Or I mean, I think that's the first question. Or do we
Well, no,
want
because it feels like if you tried, then at least
Right.
you tried, and if you ended up there, then you ended up there. So it feels like no risk in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't heard from Martin or the OSCPA that's
Right.
the waters, we shouldn't be touching that right now, so.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make
Can
sure
I-
that before we jump.
I just
into
needed like
options.
clarification on looking at it again, like just, because I agree with option 4. But like the and piece, so it talks about like, you know, you have to pass the exam and complete at least 150 hours. Obtain a bachelor's degree, obtain a master's degree, meet requirements otherwise prescribed by boards, or like, where does the and stop? Because it's like,
So that's the, okay, so this is,
you're not gonna.
I wish I could put it up.
Baccalaureate degree and.
So you think at the actual current language, right?
Well, no, I'm on option 4, but I think it applies to all of them. They all have like this and concept as though you're gonna do A, B, and C, but you're not, right?
You're gonna do little a and one of the capitals.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so should we say?
Is that's not how like it.
So, so the or is at the D. So
Yeah.
you see at the big D, there's the or.
Yeah. Right. Okay, and there's not an or, because it feels like the or would come like with B or C, like.
Well, after A.
Wouldn't
I
you
mean, 'cause
do,
it's
right, like A
or
you have
B
to do,
or C.
and then the way you're gonna
So
meet those.
This
is
comes to
B
like
or C.
legislative drafting side, so at least.
Okay,
like,
maybe
you would
it's
see-
not an issue, it just like read
you would-
weird to
well,
me.
I mean, but even that's why I think like part of the thing came up with the one that it is now, right, with the way we ended up was the or was like sort of buried even more than this, like
Right.
here I actually tried to pull the or out more and like make it more obvious that there is this or here, because it is sort of concerning that it looks like now suddenly you have to do all 3 of these, right?
Exactly.
You have to opt for all 3 options, which is not what that or does that, right? It separates it out. So you have to have, your state has to, you know, basically what, like the state has to do one of these things. For you to get your license, the state has to require one of these things. They also have to require that you pass the exam. The or is becoming, you know, basically between like what type of thing you did, right? So you have 150 plus 1, bachelor's degree plus 2, master's degree plus 1, or meet the requirements otherwise prescribed by the board and rule, which was like where we could do, if other states started to do other things, we could put that in rule if we wanted to adopt that. Or you individual did one of these things above on your own.
Yeah, right.
And you have a license.
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with that, or it just felt like there was an or that was needed.
Yeah.
Beforehand that maybe I just never thought about until it was like this, but it's like, well, as written, it almost sounds like you need to do A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, no one does, like, that can't
So
possibly.
it used to be like, I feel like in statutory ways, it used to be right, they would have put an or after each one, but now they don't do that anymore. And I don't know if that's like,
Interesting. It doesn't feel like the or is implied because
I agree with you.
it's and colon, so and then it feels like everything that comes after an and. Unless
And-
otherwise specified.
and this,
means
this,
must
or
do
this,
all.
right? Yeah. And the hard part that we're gonna get pushback on this one, which is where we ended up where we did in the first place, is that you kind of are putting in a definition within a definition. So that's why I'm worried about, if you guys want this one, I'm afraid you're gonna get more pushback on this. Because basically what I did was in creating little b, was made it sort of like a definition within a definition, which they're not gonna.
I mean,
they're gonna love.
I think if we can give the direction that says we want to deal with that remaining 1% as much as we can, I think that's the outcome. So if that means it's language in option 4, great. It's language in option 3, okay.
So in essence, what we could do, I ask for assistance on the society side, is we start with option 4, and then if that runs into trouble, offer essentially downscale to 3 and 2, 1.
But I mean, I'm with
Use
you,
it as a
Megan.
negotiating thing. So see what we can get, but I think that's, it's a negotiation. And let's start out with where we want to be and then see if that flies or doesn't fly. And quite frankly, it could end up with, it's not like it's going to be this, it's 100% of option 4 and 100% of 3 and 100% of 2 or 100% of 1. They could decide that if the request now comes in via a legislator saying, okay, we saw something like this before, we didn't like it before for this and these reasons, but now it's a legislator asking, so maybe there is a way to tweak this particular language thing, right? And that's something that is not exactly option 4, but very close to
Right.
that emerges, right? That could happen too, right? These things are a little bit unpredictable. And quite frankly, we're going to have to stay flexible a little bit on that front. The only transparent thing that I can do is once we kind of pull the trigger on this is to, because quite frankly, if we are going to pull the trigger on this, I will ask essentially for pretty immediate steps to be taken through our colleagues on the OSCPA side. Is that if that then produces here is, based on this request, here is what came back out of Ledge Council of drafting as an amendment, right? I will then circle back with the chair and Angie for an analysis of, does this get us what we want? Or do we need to kind of, based on the direction of the board, do we need to go to other options and so on? So I'm not gonna just play this on my own. Right, I'm gonna essentially say, I'm gonna work in between board meetings with council and the chair to see what we come back with. And what we can do essentially within the direction, or does something so weird happen that we need like a lunchtime meeting where we need to discuss it another time. I hope we don't have to do that. I think if you're willing to give us this much flexibility, that you say, hey, you're not just saying it has to be this language, but we start out at option 4, but you're willing to be essentially flexible throughout this stuff, that's
where we're
great.
at.
That gives me a lot of room to work with.
But Logan, you have some comments?
Option 3 just seems a lot easier on my brain. I don't know if anyone else felt that way, and it's a tiny point, but just if other people had that inclination, that might be. But if not, that's fine.
No, it's great.
My only one against that was just like the repetitive nature of it states this sort of the same thing in A, B, and C. But I mean, I agree, maybe that's. What was less work?
No, exactly. That's the exact problem, right? Like, was it like you were trying to deal with this definition and so happy.
Well, I just feel like when things are repetitive, you almost, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm an auditor, but I go and sort of look for differences. Like, wait, is B, what's different about B than C? Like.
Right. Well, and that's why I was like in the first one, and even the way it is now with the ands in the A and the B. So B and C have A and B, but A doesn't. And it's like, why is that? Like, I mean, yeah, but they're exactly the same. So that's why I was like, I don't know. That's why I was like, there's stuff that these legislative drafter people have, they have like a whole book of like stuff that they have to follow. And I don't know what those are. And but
Okay,
that's
so
how,
I think we're settled though on moving forward with an amendment with a level of flexibility to get us to kind of close off that structure.
But it sounds like we're still okay with starting off with option 4 rather than option 3.
I think so, yeah. Unless, I mean, I hear what Logan's saying too. I think it's.
They all have.
Start with
sort of-
wherever you think you need to start.
Something
Yes.
tricky about them.
Yeah.
I think the only way that we could get to true simplicity would be a much broader rewrite of our
agreed.
statutes, right? I mean, let's just be really clear and acknowledge that in public session. And for that train has left the station because then we're rewriting the bill.
LRC doesn't want to take that up?
Yeah.
Tell me this was gonna be a 10-year gig.
Okay, great. I think we
need a motion.
Okay, so we are gonna need a motion to, Jason, would you like to make a motion?
I will make a motion to allow OSCPA and our executive director and the team here, staff, to look into getting an amendment for our current bill
To the extent that they want.
to the extent that they want to.
Because Sherry doesn't have.
Thank you for that motion.
Yeah.
Yes, I shouldn't give you guys direction.
Based on the memo based on the language in the memo outlined? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Jason Robinson.
I second, and this is Logan Skill.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so we will take a vote, or any discussion before we vote? No, okay, we're gonna go around the room. Haley Lyons, aye.
Raul Valdivia, aye.
Megan Hartley, aye.
Logan Steele, aye.
Jason Robinson, aye.
Joe Sullivan, aye.
Great, motion passes. All right, thanks, guys, great discussion. New business?
All
Martin,
right.
still you. I guess I could.
Oh, that's great though. I feel like it's been good handoff so far. And Jason, this is really actually a different version of trying to get some guidance as to whether LRC should engage in this. We had a very brief discussion at the LRC on this, but this actually originated, this particular issue under new business is actually something that originated out of the peer review oversight committee. And I have to admit by now, some time ago, there was a request that came out of that very, very active and very busy committee. And you'll see that a little bit later on in the reports from Haley. They've done just a bang up job really digging in and revitalizing that committee and doing its job for peer review oversight. And that committee raised a fundamental policy question saying, hey, is there a way that we can actually get some CPE credit for the work that we're doing on this committee, right? And so I initially discussed it. I can't remember if I discussed it with you offline, Jason, or if we brought it up in an actual LRC. I can't remember simply. But in essence, there were two things that happened. One is that it seemed odd to bring this question to the board in the context of one committee, and that it really needed to be a much broader question of, does the board support the LRC kind of creating some kind of a rules framework that would allow for some version of credit for service on board committees, some version of claimable CPE credit, right? Because that's really the fundamental policy question here. And the second thing that happened is essentially implied in the first, which is that maybe it would be better for the LRC not to spend a whole bunch of time coming up with that framework if the board is actually not in favor of going in that direction at all. Now, there's a bit of history here. And maybe I think it might actually be only Joe in this room. Then, of course, Sherry, that might have been around when we had the very original discussion very early on. I remember right around 2012, 2013, there was a discussion at the board level around this issue now, by now over a decade ago. And the board declined to open that door at that time. Now, the primary reason, I think at that point it was phrased also for service on the board itself, not just the committees, right? And the board essentially at that time not only had its plate very full, but also felt like, I think the words that I distinctly remember ringing in my ear was, it seemed like a little bit self-serving to kind of go down that road. Now, fast forward to today, we have an entirely different board and we have a different profession, right? We have a profession that is far more under pressure than it is before. And please don't view this as an argument for, I think we should do this, but I just want to acknowledge that the environment has changed in two ways. Factually, the board is completely different. We haven't had this discussion in a long time. And the fact is that regardless of what we're talking about, whether it's board service, committee service, or any kind of a voluntary service by a CPA, it's harder to get that right now because CPAs are tremendously busy, right? So I think the right thing to do was to at least bring it up for a little bit of a feeler with this board about where is this board at on this policy issue, right? Because if the board is kind of in the same place or a very similar place to where it was at 10 years ago, then we simply have the discussion and we're all done and we're not creating any more asks for the LRC. Or we find out from the discussion today saying, hey, we do want to open the door and maybe there are some frameworkish things that this board wants to say to the LRC saying, hey, we actually would like to open the door, but we want to put some kind of a framework around it if you can bring that back to the LRC, right? So that's kind of where things are at. That's kind of the setting the frame for this.
Joe, you're still unmuted. Does that mean you have something to say or are you just unmuted?
Yeah, no, I had something to say. Yeah, as somebody that, probably easy for me to speak on this because it wouldn't be self-serving. I'd be in favor of opening that door and having that conversation. And yeah, it's scary that I've been around that long. I wasn't on the board then, I was on BOAC, but I'm in favor of doing that. I think everyone on the committees and the board puts in a tremendous amount of work. And so I'd be in favor of having that conversation and having LRC considering a framework for that. I think the primary reason, not only outside of the amount of work, I think it actually would help create a pipeline of people that would consider joining a committee or the board in the future, if that's, something that would be available. And so I'm completely in favor of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when you think about, particularly the LRC and BOAC, all of the committees really are, doing really substantive work there.
Are we just talking about this board and these committees?
Yes,
That we are, it's not open to a CPA being on another board?
correct.
And why not?
That's a really great question because I think the asterisk I need to put on here, and it might even be in your materials, or I apologize if it's not, but I think existing rules of the board actually already allow claiming of credit if you serve on the RAB.
This is
The
specifically.
committee OSCPA side, so not a board committee, but if you essentially are part of the peer review oversight process on the peer review process over an OSCPA and that committee, that is actually already eligible for CPE credit.
This is not a new topic either to the board. Joe will make you feel better, okay? Because if you go back and look, I mean, we have CPE catalogs for years and years and years, and just in our archive, and they always have the Division 40 for CPE listed in them because it was which we would obtain from the board. If you go back and there, you see a variety of things, and before peer review, you see quality review in there. Also, you saw something, I'm not suggesting it, but You saw something for serving on the legislature's Ways and Means Committee. There weren't other boards. I mean, there weren't other things outside of the profession other than that Ways and Means piece.
Yeah, which we've taken out, by the way.
Yes, that's right. So it's not unusual. I would say the one thing that LRC, if you decide to move it over to have LRC, it's for this, you know, LRC would just want to make sure that they're not putting something in that, you know, people claim CPE credit, they are licensed in multiple states, and then they find themselves with something not being applicable in another state, but there's always there's nuances from state to state anyway, so I think as long as people are very careful with their CPE and understand the rules in each of those states where they're licensed, then. So it's not, like I said, it's not a new topic.
Because from my view, I've served on several boards, and it has always come to my attention that when I get on a board and I sign up on a board as a CPA, there is some risk when I sit in the board and advise the director and the rest of the board. They're expecting me to bring my expertise to the table, and that's why they called me, and that's why I volunteered. And so there's a lot of hours, like there's a lot of work, a lot of hours put into these things, not just on this board or the committees, but CPAs in general serving on boards that are legitimate boards, and whether it's a nonprofit or even a church or something that where they are there because they're a CPA. And you mentioned outside the profession. I think this is still within the profession because we're out there. And so I would be in favor of considering a minimal amount of time spent, just like they do for, like we do for teaching. You know, there's X amount you can use if you're instructing. Now, why do we get credit for that? Because we are putting our expertise out there, correct?
Well, and there's some history to that too, in that, you know, if you go back for teaching, you had to be teaching before a professional audience of other CPAs and things. And I want to be clear, I personally am not suggesting, and I'm not disagreeing with your role, but I'm not suggesting that the credit be available just because someone's serving on any type of board, because some have formality and some have less formality, right? But I'm just saying that tied to the Board of Accountancy's, you know, history, there were some pieces there as Martin is saying for PROC now, but back for quality review before PROC, and, you know, Ways and Means for the legislative piece. So, and I'm not disagreeing with you.
No, sure, I understand.
Clarifying that.
Well, I'm in favor of opening it up in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
Discussion. All right, and maybe even going down that path that I just mentioned, but you know.
Am I hearing possibly beyond the board committees themselves and saying service on
I mean, people may think, no, that's a real rotten bad idea, but it's just, just in my experience in service, there's a lot of us who volunteer on boards and put ourselves at risk or on the line when we.
Okay, so your frame would be more of a volunteer service rather than.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't.
Paid service, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't, to me, because most of the boards that I've been on, I don't get paid. So.
Yeah. Okay. So Jason, you hearing this from your LRC hat, with your LRC hat on now, what additional guidance would you want to have from the board beyond this discussion? Now, good?
A couple of things. Is this technical CPE credit? How many hours max? If it's broadened, I agree with Raul that, yeah, when I've asked to been serve on certain boards, yep, I've sat on religious boards for years. And that's not why they asked me to serve. My service there, other than the topics being discussed, are no different from the leadership or that sort of thing. So if you want to broaden it, what are the fences that you'd like around that? If it's kept to service on the Board of Accountancy or any of its committees, that makes it pretty simple. if you want to broaden that to, yep, that includes service on the AICPA board of directors, or any of the, you know, the taxation committee,
CPA.
or, so where is the fences that you would like
I
to
just feel like it
have?
would need some, because
It
otherwise you
needs
get
some
into things
fences.
like HOA board. You know,
Yes,
it's like,
I
I don't know
agree.
if I join my HOA, if that, you know, would mean that I'm serving in a CPA.
And it
capacity.
can even
Yeah.
be some type of position, like you're the treasurer on this board because you're a CPA, they want you to be the treasurer, for example. Or some type of thing, not just, I'm a board member, I just happen to be CPA, but I'm a
Right,
board
right,
member and somebody else is, I'm not an officer. For example.
I hesitate. I will take to the LRC anything the board directs, and we'll talk it through and bring back proposals. One thing to think about, I would like those fences, to recommend those fences be a little bit tighter. Because again, right now, I'm in a position, religious position, where I look at, notice the terminology I'm using to the auditor next to me, I look at the financial information for 9 religious units, and then meet monthly with the man who's in charge of those religious units and say, here's what's happening. Am I using the skills that I've learned as a CPA to do that? Yes. Do I think I have CPE credit for that? Jason personally does not. So can you give me some boundaries to take back to LRC? Again, I totally understand what you're saying, because I've been on other boards where they say, oh, we want you because you're a CPA. Will the board please provide some boundaries there?
I guess I see CPE as if the work you're doing, I mean, and this could be said for what we're paid to do in our normal jobs, but it's like, if the work that you're doing is enriching your ability to serve your clients in another capacity, then it's sort of has that educational component. If what you're doing on that board, where, you know, I think that LRC and the PROC and the BOAC, I think, does that because of just how technical that work is, and usually here. But if we're the expert in the room on a board, is that meeting the nature of education and an educational learned moment for yourself?
The comment that Sherry made about the additional credit, or somebody made about the additional credit for being a speaker, I get that, because as a speaker, the amount of time that goes into preparing and putting together, I totally get that extra, you know, double the time that you speak kind of thing.
It does feel like it would have to be stringent enough though, because I mean, they would get audited, right? And it would have to be, that CPE would have to be auditable. And so it can't be too loosey-goosey where it's sort of, you know, the auditor would have a tough time saying like, well, does this meet it or not?
For many years in CPE, I would receive questions, and obviously, I always say that they're about people's license and they start getting that range, push them to the board. But we would always say, look, here's the piece of the rules. And then you need to think about if your CPE is audited, can you substantiate why you're taking, right? And that helps. But the other thing I want to remind everybody, and I don't know what the answer is, but there is the National CPE Statement on Standards for Continuing Professional Education, which is NASPA and AICPA Joint Committee. So that kind of gets back to my point of, you know, whatever comes out of this board to laws and rules, you know, that's a very good resource because it's what so many look at.
So if I may, since we're digging a little bit into the weeds here, the existing standard that we use in our rules now for credit for service on the RAB, the review acceptance body, is 2 hours of CPE credit per meeting attended for a maximum of 16 hours claimable credit for the renewal period, right? So that's essentially kind of the limitation that we currently have in rule for the RAB piece. And that may give us a starting point to kind of say, do we want to broaden that concept out beyond the RAB? I mean, I'm just saying, it's a starting point,
Mhm.
because that's where we're at in our rules now.
Whatever you direct me, we'll do.
So if you feel comfortable with that, we can just take that back to the LRC and saying, can you take that as a starting point and talk through some of the other scenarios?
Adam has his hand up. Good job.
Thank you. I guess just one more kind of type of thing to consider here that's related. I think I serve on the City of Portland's Revenue Division Appeals Board, which hears, so it's volunteer. There's 5 of us. We're all either CPAs or otherwise qualified in state and local taxes. It's a lot of work. We hear cases, write opinions and decisions for taxpayers, and it's definitely like related to maintaining our professional competence. So another thing, just to consider, there's also these types of boards and things that are at the local or county, municipal level as well. So another thing that seems to me like very similar. I was on the BOAC at one point, and it's very similar to my service on the BOAC in terms of the content and the detail with which we review cases, which is substantial. So
one more question to tie into that. So if we decided that appeals board that Adam's on, and I totally understand, because you'd be in law and everything else, Adam, as you're researching. So Adam submits his renewal. He gets chosen at random by Andrew for audit, or whoever chooses for audit. What does he submit?
Meeting minutes?
In our current rule
Agendas,
for RAB,
yeah, right.
it is record of evidence of attendance of the meeting and agenda.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the RAB would have to keep that. Actually,
All the RAB
licensee,
stuff
because
would go to OSCPA, or have the person who's submitting the credit saying, here is my attendance record from OSCPA, or OSCPA, if audited, would have to say, yes, this person attended XYZ meetings during this renewal period.
Well, and Adam specifically made reference to like developing and maintaining his professional excellence, or,
Mhm,
something like
yeah.
that. I almost wonder if you could pull something from the CPE references that Sherry had, right? That,
Mhm.
and yes, that would be a judgment call, but I mean, that judgment could be worked out in audit, like if somebody,
Alabama has a good rule for participation and work on technical committee of an international, national, or state professional association, council or member organization, or a government entity that supports professional services or industries that require unique and specific knowledge in technical fields of study count, but portions of the meeting that are devoted to administrative or organization matters don't count.
So then you're bifurcating the time, and the individual's bifurcating the time that is in the meeting. I'm looking at this from an administrative standpoint, because then it becomes more of a challenge of, okay, how much of this meeting was this and how much of this meeting was that, and splitting it up. It's a little bit easier with CPE, I think, where, yep, these 3 speakers were technical. This speaker was, in this category, this speaker was ethics. Versus a meeting like this meeting, we've certainly had some technical discussions, but if I were to turn to any one of you and say, okay, Jason, what percentage of this meeting has been, can you put it into buckets for me? And
well,
your
something
buckets
like
might
this,
be
I would almost say
different.
is like 100%, and I think you can weed some of that out by looking at the agenda and the meeting minutes. I mean, a lot of agendas are timed. I mean,
Mhm.
and we're just looking for the person to put forth their sort of best.
Are we making it easier for people to get CPE? Are we making it easier for us to recruit for our boards?
Well, I think the second, I've thought about the second too. I mean, I think people who are trying to put financial experts on boards would appreciate the little extra nudge that CPE credit could give.
Yeah,
true.
I don't know.
it's a lot of commitment to serve on some of these boards. I mean, even the BOAC, like that's a lot of reading. It's a lot of commitment. I don't remember how many hours I spent reading, preparing for those meetings. And I may be a little more thorough than, maybe than the average board member, but I think I still, there's a lot that goes into those. The other thing I was going to say is I think we could look to a little bit to the existing language for CPE instructors. I think it has some language in there around like you only get credit if it like increases the instructor's professional competence or something like that. There's some language in there around that in the existing rule, I believe. So that might be helpful, but that's what my intent, my thought would be that it wouldn't necessarily apply in any situation where you're serving on a board, but I think, making some attestation or show that that it is something that increases your professional competence would be a key. And then, obviously proof of the meeting existing and all of that.
Sherry, I was going to reference that similar item that Adam did, and the other thing too is just, without getting too much into the weeds, just to remind, you're not going to be getting certificate of CPE credit for these types of things, and so there's that pathway to be thinking about too, right? Like a lot of times people don't, like we'll get calls even at the office where people are inquiring, not related to this topic at all, just about, hey, what's a CPE certificate? Somebody in my office, when they're not a CPA firm or they're not industry, but, somebody attended a CPE course from, let's just say, commercial.
Yeah, and didn't have a credit.
Doesn't happen very often, but I don't take those calls the way I used to.
Madam Chair, the LRC will take that on and come back with proposals. May I also ask, the LRC has 3 meetings already scheduled to work on rule for legislation that we are extremely hopeful will pass. And because that rule will need to be put before this board and approved and tweaked as necessary before December. May we focus on that rule first and then move to this, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Kind of deal with that after September, yeah.
Yeah. Is your DoorDash here?
Oh, it's here.
It's been here.
Yeah, why didn't nobody bring it in?
Didn't want to interrupt.
I know, well, and I was like, the CPE conversation's gonna take like 2 seconds, and then 7 hours later, we're done. Your cold coffee. You wanna grab coffee and then we'll jump back into go get it.
Right, yeah, exactly, right, just in case. Yeah, because I am like, when it's hot, I like.
No,
hot.
Logan sent me a, he was 3 miles 3 years ago. I was like,
How anybody's scheduled for us.
We have to go, so there's some cold drinks.
I would never allow this.
We probably have these.
Yeah.
Okay, so the description on the slide. will have to-
Save on for one.
Thank you.
You've had 3 breaks so far.
And just, GR. Our chocolate cream holder.
Sherry, GR chocolate.
Vanilla latte,
Sounds like a
venti.
DJ name from the 70s. Yeah, so just so you know.
Listen, I mean, I have a better, it's nitro, like I need, I mean, you can stop this and see.
It's different things.
The taster.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I remember.
Caramel, oat milk latte, it's quaint.
Organizations in 7th grade. That's one of the things.
One small espresso cup.
Right.
Right, just
Good.
clear.
Start and stop. Yes.
Oh, that's a video much.
Should I give the only benefit?
If you want something that makes sense, we usually have about 2. They're all over skin. At the top.
And
Different metals. And once you get good, you get spinach and it's baby spin on. They'll go for
vanilla.
a long,
Vanilla.
but they're also tactile, so you can spray them while you're on the phone.
I mean, I spent so much time on the phone, I always have and the spinny chair is the worst for me, because otherwise I'm just like.
Yeah.
Like my fidgets help keep me from spinning the chair.
I get up and pace my office because I wear.
Well, if I'm on not a video.
Yeah.
I think it's the knife.
I pace, not the knife.
I'm sorry, yeah. I was like, wait a second. Yeah.
tricky. I haven't gotten it. It's like-
There's so many, I know, when you're ordering online, it's like, it's because he's like, you know, he's going off screen. We appreciate you.
Well, thanks for.
Yeah.
Being the.
Okay, so our next agenda item is, we're still in new business, new NASBA resources. Martin's gonna go through this in 120 seconds.
I'll keep that in 30 seconds. This is really just an FYI item. I want to make sure that folks know that there is this Alliance for Responsible Professional Licensing that NASBA is part of, and they share resources. So I just make it a practice to share that in board materials. It's not anything that I would want to get into unless there are questions. I do not have item B3. I did not get the Q4 reports yet, so you're going to have to wait for those till the June board meeting. And then there is a notice in there that you should all have gotten as board members for a webinar on an update on how CPA exam evolution is going. I think that webinar is tomorrow. You have it in your materials. That's it. Less than 120 seconds for the record.
Well done. Okay, I am now adjourning the public session of the board and to the second executive session of the board. This time under authority of ORS 192.660, paren 2, paren F and H, consideration of records exempt from disclosure and council advice. The time is now 11:21 a.m. Staff, please remove any guests from Zoom, and any guests in the boardroom are now asked to wait outside the boardroom to be summoned back after they have worked themselves. Food options available in the board's kitchen.
Nice.
That's sort of like high maintenance to say.
Sherry, you're welcome to use my office.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Jason, a lot.
Okay. I've waited the requisite moment. Good morning. This is for Chair Haley Lyons. It's February 4th at 11:22 a.m. And the Oregon Board of Accountancy is entering executive session under authority of ORS 192.660, paren 2, paren F, and paren H, consideration of records exempt from disclosure and council advice. Okay, so we don't have anybody appearing today, do we, Jeremiah?
No.
Okay, so you can forget about that part. I just wanted to have a just.
Of the Board of Accountancy on February 4th, 2025. The time is now 11:47 a.m. So what should we do?
So now we go back to the
Right.
main
Do we,
agenda.
are we?
And now we use the voting matrix as a guide.
Oh,
And
we
I don't know
haven't-
if Sherry's still here. Oh, we do still have, what's the lunch plan, Andrew?
There's a tray of food.
It's in the kitchen.
Okay, so essentially we just go back out and do like the buffet thing. Okay, perfect.
10-minute break before.
Yeah, should we grab lunch and then jump into public session?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay.
This is our now 17th break. We're meeting today.
Oh, so is this where I say that Joe sent me kind of a joking email last night? Kind of referencing the 11 p.m.
Yeah, saying 11 a.m. You told
And
me
he
that.
basically said 11 a.m.
I know. I have like 1 o'clock in my mind, which should be
Just for the
no
record,
problem.
as super efficient as Joe has been, he's never pulled off an 11 a.m. closure. Just
He
say
hasn't,
that for the
and he would
record.
not have allowed any of the coffee getting or the coffee ordering and all the shenanigans that have been happening so far. Joe waited, that let me down by not showing up.
Sorry.
To be like, no, what are you doing? You can't, don't let them order coffee.
Yeah, I was thinking like 11:30, so.
I know, I had noon kind of in my mind, but I'm thinking now.
You're close.
Yeah, you were doing great, Haley.
You're doing
You are doing great, Haley. It's
Oh,
fine.
thank you.
Don't
thank
let Joe skew you.
Oh, Haley's doing awesome. Better than I can.
you.
Yeah. Okay. Everything. Yes. The new frontier. Yeah. I'm pretty excited to start going to the. Bird? It's love, it's lovers. You wanna get rid of that. I suppose that. But others as. Are the most of that implies that. Yeah. Yeah. Like not in a perfect. You should share it. Yeah, of course. But it's like. Shut up. Yeah.
No, yeah. I didn't do my job this time, so you fell short. I didn't do my job this time around, so the executive session is very short.
Yeah, I know, all you do is nap.
It's in the old.
Yeah.
You know, the old days, they'd be, like 3 hours or something.
Oh, yeah.
right,
World can hear you.
already. I need to re-announce that we are calling the meeting to order. Public session. Great question. Yeah, I am calling the meeting, the public session of the Board of Accountancy back to order. It's February 4th, 2025. The time is 12:01 p.m. For the record, we have the same persons previously present in public session are present again, so I will not read up. So we are going to move to motions on cases heard in executive session. Remember, when you make a motion, say your first and last name. Second, discussion and vote.
I think it's listed on one of the items, but not on the other. But is it for both?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion for multiple violations of OAR 801-010-0130 lapse licenses for practicing public accountancy with a lapse license. And this is case number 24-014, and this is Jason Robinson.
Good job.
And do I have a second?
Second. Megan Hartley.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, any discussion about this case? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Haley Lyons, aye.
Rob Valdivia, aye.
Megan Hartley, aye.
Logan Steele, aye.
Jason Robinson, aye.
Joe Sullivan, aye.
Great. Motion passes.
Jason Robinson, I make a motion for case 24-014 for multiple violations of OAR 801-030-0020, Plan 8, Plan B, board communications and investigations for not responding to board communications within 21 days.
Second.
Megan Hartley, second.
Great. Any discussion? We take a vote. Haley Lyons, aye.
Rob Valdivia, aye.
Megan Hartley, aye.
Logan Steele, aye.
Jason Robinson, aye.
Joe Sullivan, aye.
Passes.
Jason Robinson, make a motion to close the inquiries that are listed. Do you want me to go through each one of the?
Just name the case numbers.
I make a motion to close the inquiries 2024-INQ-018 through, oh, I guess I can't do through because we're missing one. Through 021 and then 20-24 inquiry-023.
Megan Hartley, second.
Great, thank you. Any discussion? Haley Lyons, aye.
Rob Valdivia, aye.
Megan Hartley, aye.
Logan Steele, aye.
Jason Robinson, aye.
Joe Sullivan, aye.
Does that conclude all of our motions? Okay. We do not have any consideration of settlement proposals, so I'll move on to my report. So committee appointments and committee liaison appointments. Currently, we have Raul doing BOAC, Jason LRC, and Logan for pipeline. We will probably need to find a PROC chair at some, or PROC liaison at some point. And so that will be forthcoming. Additionally, we spoke several meetings ago about talking about extending Oregon CPA exam credits to licensees to be in compliance, for to kind of come into compliance with new sort of rules, and allowed Martin to make these decisions on as people called and asked for them. Martin and I discussed the option of just preemptively extending everybody who was not extending, might make them go through the administrative thought process of calling up and asking for an extension, and then having NASDA extend them on a one-to-one basis. So, any other comments about that?
No, I mean, it's, I will simply say, I got curious because of a particular case that had come through about, okay, what's the picture really look like over at NASBA, right? Because you may recall that there was this window, right? We had a whole bunch of extensions that occurred because they were authorized under board rules. Under that national framework for the credit extension, that window ended on May 11, 2023, which is when the public health emergency ended, right? And then you have that, if you will, that donut hole between that date and December 2020, December 31 of 2023, right? Because any credit that was still valid on January 1, 2024 was automatically extended all the way out to June 30th, 2025, because the exam changed. That's called the CPA evolution credit. And so I just asked them, show me whoever's not in that, show me what's going on for Oregon specific candidates, right? And they literally sent me back a list of, these are not unique candidates, so please don't go into shock. But in terms of sections that had expired during that time, 296 of them, which is not a small number, right? And so I basically said, look, we've already passed rules that we're doing a 30-month retroactive, not just a 30-month window, but a 30-month retroactive window, right? We've already, which is essentially was never really updated on a retroactive basis in that system, right? And so essentially I talked with Haley and said, can we simply grant a 6 months extension to those folks, because that then kicks them into CPA evolution territory and get their credits extended to June 30th. And so Haley blessed that, and that request went out to NASBA on Thursday. Seems like long ago, but it was just Thursday.
It provides candidates then know kind of where they stand, and
yeah,
they're not required to kind of jump through the hoops to find out if they ask for, this extension, they could get it, and then they fall into, it's like, take that thing off of their plate.
So that's probably the last hurrah that we have in terms of being able to use kind of our own power to help people get through the pipeline, because this whole extension regime, all of them end on June 30th, 2025, except for what was in place before we had all these unique extensions, which is the essentially the ability on a case-by-case basis to extend by 6 months, right? What doesn't go away is the stuff that we did by rule that's permanent, right? That we now have a 30-month window to pass the exam, right? That's now sitting in the rule. That obviously is not going away, but a lot of these one-off extension regimes, whether it's because of the new exam or because of the public health credits that expire during the public health emergency, if you will, that phase is over. I mean, essentially so there's a bit of a bubble in the system with folks that are sitting on these credits that essentially ends on June 30th, 2025. But there's a lot of people who are now motivated, who are saying, oh, wow, this credit is still alive. Maybe I just need to pass 1 more or 2 more sections rather than 3 or 4. And that's a pretty powerful motivator for folks, right? I mean, you saw the last one-off that I had, which was literally a gentleman who went from 1 valid section, one credit expiring on June 30th to 3 of them still valid and expiring on June 30th. So that gentleman knows the moment he's done with tax season, if he hunkers down and gets through that last section, he actually is there, right? And that's pretty powerful incentive. So I'm hoping that it will make a difference. So thank you, Haley, for doing that. Bless you.
Report of Vice Chair.
Yeah, I just want to comment and just thank Tanya and Adam and the rest of the BOAC committee for all the hard work they do. There's a lot of stuff that comes through. Adam mentioned the hours of time he puts in, and I can, I know I'm one of those ones who doesn't do as much as what he suggested. But just seeing those cases come through and just be in my experience, in my practice, you know, you hear a lot of things and about our colleagues, which just seeing the flow of stuff that comes through across their desk and up to this board. It's just, I'm just grateful and very appreciative of all the hard work they do, and hearing this out and making sure our profession is on the straight and narrow. Even though we may or may not get it right all the time, or we just don't have all the facts, it's just the fact that they're there, keeping that, you know, keeping us in line and everybody else in line. And I just want to thank them for all that hard work.
Thank you. Jason, treasurer.
As you can see from our treasury report, we're still in the green. We're doing really well, budgetary wise. Martin continues to save us money by not doing IT related work.
Thanks, Jason, for phrasing it so positive.
Other than that, any questions on the treasury report?
Okay, Martin.
Right. Andrew, fair warning, this will be the shortest executive director report in history. Okay. I have nothing to report beyond all the other items that have already been reported to the board. Pretty much know what I've been up to, including with the stuff that we just covered under the chair report. So I will not take up any more of your time, you know, what's been going on in my.
I will say that Martin is a significant leader on the national front in terms of who comes, comments, and advice. So that work takes a lot of time and is very appreciative, and is you know, demonstrating that Oregon is a leader in these areas, which is cool. So thanks for that work.
Appreciate that. Yes, that's been fun and interesting.
Andrew.
All right. As we heard from Jason, not much happening on tech side. Thank you for that. To not get into the weeds too much, we are going to have to go through a slow procurement process to work on a new integrated licensing platform and database. Just procurement part alone, which will take 6-7 months. Last board meeting, I had reported that we would possibly be able to hop on to another agency's request to work with FileMaker, but when it went out to bid, they had no companies bid on it. So that did not give us a good outlook for that. All licensing staff, including me, have now switched to soft phones. So licensees and any public calling should not be able to have nobody answer during business hours. Anyone should be able to answer or get a call through, is what I was trying to say. Which is good for remote workers because now they can get calls when they're working at home. And with the licensing staff, working with HR each week on updating position descriptions for the 3 licensing staff and myself. And then having the 3 licensing staff cross-train so they'll all be able to do each other's jobs minus the lead staff for the licensing coordinator.
One quick clarifying comment, what Andrew just described is essentially what that means at a super high level is, with Daz's blessing and support, we are already implementing a personnel structure that is still subject to final blessing in the budget process that we're going through. So it's kind of like this odd 2-step where we get to implement already, but the final blessing still needs to happen, right? So which actually means a terrific amount of grace for us from the executive branch side, right? But it doesn't mean that it's actually final. We still actually have to have that legislative blessing at the end of the day, but I really appreciate Andrew taking that on. So I just wanted to make sure that that's really clear for the record, kind of how these pieces interconnect.
And I left off one small thing, but I think it's gonna be major for licensees and staff ourselves, is working on just an online renewal application integrated with payment. Working on that with Tyler Tech right now. If we can get enough testing done in March, hope to roll it out this renewal season. And that will allow us to download the applications and export them to Excel and then upload to our database, reducing a lot of staff time and staff possible error from data entry from all the applications. And also communication back with licensees for incomplete applications, because we'll be able to have required fields.
Great.
That's been a real difficult one for us because we have people very well intentioned and they're doing the PDF form and they're just basically filling out whatever they feel like filling out.
Yeah.
And then it puts us in a position of then having to reach back and saying, we actually need this information to be able to process this, right? Which then puts us behind the curveball right away. So if we can pull off, which is still an if, right? But I really appreciate Andrew trying. If we can get to that place where folks are actually able to open an application and say, this is what you actually need to fill out, and you can't actually click the submit button unless those fields are filled in, it will make it much easier for us to, number one, reduce our own data entry errors, but it also means that the times when we have to run after folks for incomplete stuff is just much, much lower. So
And there should be 5 different versions: the active, active immunity, inactive, retired, and do not intend to renew. So that way it eliminates a lot of the information on the renewal app that doesn't apply to certain.
and it sounds like, this is my best understanding, that work is small enough in terms of an adjustment to essentially working with our existing payment processor to essentially expand that capacity that essentially we may be spared, and sorry, I'll put this a little edgily, even though we're in a public meeting, that we spared the hell of a full procurement process and be able to much more streamlined kind of a surgical thing of let's just at least get this. So that's the idea.
Yes, it falls well within, well under the 25,000 threshold.
Yes, and a $25,000 threshold is the threshold that essentially at the agency level, regardless of size of agency, so this is happy land for small agencies, right? $25,000 is what on the DOJ and DAS procurement side is essentially the limit for what they call, technical term is sole source authority, right? So that's essentially the maximum amount of money you can spend on a contract without going through the procurement process. So it sounds like we can get in under that lid and hopefully prove Jason partially wrong that we're completely unable to spend money on our IT stuff. If we can, there's at least a small portion that we might be able to push out the door. So.
Thanks, Andrew. Anything else?
None.
I have a question about the online thing. Is this going to be an optional?
We will still have paper applications for certain licensees that prefer handwritten and to do things than submit checks.
We still have an active discussion, which we have not yet resolved because we are really struggling with our retired licensee population and their ability to connect with us online. That's been a real difficult part, both for them and for us, mutually difficult. And we're actually discussing for that population possibly going back to paper because it just seems to work better for that population than trying to force them through a technology process that many of them are just really uncomfortable with.
Awesome. All right, Quinn, you provided the first draft of the communications plan.
Yes.
But please say a few words, do your thing.
Yeah, I can share it, so
Great.
everybody can follow along.
Can actually do that. I love it when my staff is more techie than I am.
Oh,
We can do it like that, that's fine. I know presenting mode feels not, there you go.
There we go.
Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Quinn Stoddard, and I am the Compliance and Communication Specialist for the Oregon Board of Accountancy. And I'm presenting to you the draft social media plan for us. Today, we'll be going over a goal, some objectives to reach that goal, the social media landscape. I provided an example of a post that would go up, how I'd like to represent, how we want to represent the BOA on social media, as well as how to grow social media. So to break it down, our goal here is, from a social media standpoint, is to inform the public about the importance of the BOA as the regulatory board, its role as a protector of the public interest, and to try to help foster proactive solutions to issues that the BOA faces, whether that be licensing, compliance, or anything in between. To kind of like ground this communication plan in something real, I use the education entertainment model, which is essentially a communication theory which combines both education and entertainment values to try to create the most engagement for a particular message that you put out. How do we achieve our goal? So the first thing is to create and localize social media platforms to ensure equal coverage on as many platforms as possible. I've already begun doing this with Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, as well as YouTube. I have things like Facebook and Instagram have there's actually a business suite app that you can utilize. So when you make a post on one, you do it for all. It's just kind of a way to condense all of these apps to reduce the amount of time it takes to manage all of these things. Ideally, currently it's an at-will posting. Ideally, it'll turn into multiple times a week. Once we have an actual posting schedule, and members of the board have been able to see the plan, look at it, recognize it, and provide ideas if they have any. Posts should strive to connect different audiences with messages created for a specific message in mind. So obviously, with the world of accounting, we have a lot of different people, whether it be incoming CPA students who are currently active CPAs, inactive licensees, retired. There's a lot of different categories, and messages should be geared towards that in mind. So the message you would give a student may not necessarily be the same you give a retired personnel who's looking to learn more about the BOA, but they're looking through another view. Posts meant for en masse consumption require guidelines for how the message should look, font, verbiage, etc. So this is just basically a standard of how the image looks, what kind of language it should do, what that font should be, and kind of how it's essentially a standard for each post. So there is a template, not just random posts kind of willy-nilly. The media landscape as it is for the BOA, the ones that you see already are social media sites that we currently have a active profile on that have posts on there. LinkedIn and the newsletter are currently in progress. There are artifacts from the previous iterations of BOA boards where there's still profiles on it removed and verified. The newsletter is another thing that I have in process. I've been working with Kenny from NASBA in trying to collect resources for newsletters and collecting the information for that. I'd like to try to restart a quarterly newsletter to try to inform our CPAs here in Oregon and other people that are interested in the BOA. The BOA website is currently, it should say, in progress. That's my current goal right now, is both I'm doing the top-down re-look at it, looking at the forms, updating forms, looking at the information, making sure everything is up to date. Links are easy to find. There's a link for everything. So if somebody's looking, wow, this OAR is connected to this rule, but I have no idea what this OAR says. Well, there's a link now so they can be directed right to it. So who is following us? Who is following and who is important to us? I'll preface this by saying everybody who takes an interest in the BOA is important to us. However, we do have certain audiences and stakeholders that we want to make sure we take a special care of. So that, as I mentioned before, that audience would include people like CPA licenses, or people of all license levels, accounting firms, the general public, lawmakers, as well as Oregon colleges and educators. And the stakeholders are the BOA members, associate organizations, the state itself, and I also put the general public because they have an important stake in this, in the protection of the public, the same as. Here's an example of a post that I made. So it's kind of an idea of like a Friday Fun Day post. So the goal is to try to create something recognizable that people can see, but also insert like a accounting term. So you can see it's a cruel world sometimes. To try to kind of play on the idea it's wordplay. But the idea is to try to create this notion that the BOA is an approachable entity based off of both customer surveys, as well as like my experience with compliance and people responding to that. Sometimes like when they get a letter saying you've committed X violation and this is going to happen, people don't react and they don't respond, they get nervous, or they have a misconception about what the BOA is or what we do. So the idea is to try to create a more approachable face for us. So when people do have questions, they don't feel uncomfortable to try to they don't feel uncomfortable to try to talk to us. What messages do we want to use about ourselves? So speaking more on how we present ourselves, the goal is we want to be able to highlight and humanize the employees here, as well as the board members and committee members. Ideally, this will help improve the trustworthiness and efficacy of the BOA. If people can look at us and say, hey, I know that person, I could see them by name and I know who they are, that creates more of a personable approach, and you can have that kind of, the idea is not to create a parasocial relationship, but you want that familiarity. So potential customers or repeat customers have that comfort knowing, hey, I can call so-and-so and they're going to deal with my issue, no problems. Informing about our missions also helps cast us in a protective light rather than a disciplinary. By highlighting what we do at the BOA, we can argue for why we are critical. You know, we are an agency that does public protection. We know we are important. The state knows that we are important, and many of our stakeholders know that. However, what many of the public may not know, they may not even know we exist. So it's important to try to get ourselves out there and get on the front step to try to explain who we are. Now, the fun part is how do we grow? So ideally, the only way to grow is to continue to use the sites to post. One of the goals that we have from growth is to increase the social media presence, to provide helpful, verifiable information, and become a trusted regulatory entity. Looking through the different websites, doing kind of price comparisons, the best price comparison that came out is Facebook. You can do both single posts as well as do an ad for the page itself, which is the Oregon Board of Accountancy. There's a price range of $2 to $5. The recommended base start is $7 a day. Doing that for a month, so you could either focus on the page itself, or you could focus on a specific post. So mentioned before was the notion of CPE for committee members. That could be turned into a social media post that could then be boosted to different stakeholders and audiences in Oregon. So it's definitely a way to try to put our message out there and to get it to a wider audience. At the moment, there was these social medias there was no social media to speak of for some of these sites. So trying to get our image out there more is a slow process. This is one way that it can be done in a slightly faster method. And that leaves me with any questions.
Giving metrics for measuring our growth.
Yes, I do. Well, I did in a previous version that unfortunately I took out. So basically the metrics I wanted to condense the plan. The metrics would be essentially how many people are visiting the site to start with. So we would go off of how many people, so per post you can see the engagement on it and how to get that engagement. So obviously the best thing what we want to do is to try to incur more engagement, but the only way to do that is to get the page on a larger platform, so more people are actually following us. Mm-hmm. So it's a system where the metrics we have, the metrics are built into the social media sites as well, where you can track the engagement. Was there something specific that you're looking for?
So if you're talking about engagement, I'm thinking also phone calls and emails and indoor, people walking in the doors. So are we measuring any of that stuff now while we're not doing the social media? And so in preparation to say, you're doing an awesome job, look, we've had 20 people in the last month come in and ask such and such, we've had an uptick in our phone calls. And so I think we're missing an opportunity to say what good work you're doing by all the social media posts, by just measuring what's on the social media. So.
Okay.
It's a super fair question, and you're essentially, if I'll flip it on its head and say you're kind of 2 steps ahead. It's an excellent question. Right now, quite frankly, we are in such an infancy stage in terms of how we engage with our community, right? Because it's primarily website, they happen to have my cell phone, they call, they walk in here. We have a not a terribly great website right now, right? And basically up until a short time ago, if we had any presence on social media, it was outdated profiles and nothing super relevant, right? So in essence, what Quinn is doing is kind of dragging us out of the dark ages and trying to set up a much more consistent way for us and kind of enabling what we did in our strategic plan, which is saying, how can we engage with our community, right? And then you're absolutely right, as we build this stuff, we should figure out, not just for the social media stuff, but overall, can we get a baseline for how are we engaging, and then measure against that baseline over time? Because I think I completely agree with where you're going. Right now, I feel like I want to build the things that would allow us to measure something. That's essentially that will be kind of my first reaction, but your instinct is absolutely right on the money that we shouldn't just measure the media stuff, but our overall engagement is kind of what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm a little concerned is because whenever you apply dollars to a new thing, then people start looking at that with a critical eye.
Yeah.
So we're not prepared for that inquiry.
Yeah.
And I hate for legislative session that we're starting
Yeah.
something new up there going, so we heard you guys are all on Facebook now. So yeah, that's one thing I have.
Nothing's counted, I guess, or annotated except through the survey. I don't keep a list of calls that come in or anything like that. It's just measured through the survey. I can start tracking that though.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just a little
Think about it.
confused on.
Well, if we have an average of 20 calls a month, and then you start being active on Facebook, and all of a sudden we have an uptick of 40 calls a month or 100, that could be either we've done something to piss off our community, or you're doing a great job of getting the word out. So that's usually the only reason why we have an uptick is we've done something to upset our community, but we're really getting out there on Facebook, LinkedIn, and all those places, on X. Yeah, I think it would be a good measure to have ahead of time. So we're saying, well, we only had this in the past, and now look at what we're doing so far. Or just this last month, we measured this right before we implemented all these other cool things. So.
Okay, yeah, I could create like a questionnaire as well to be, so we could actually correlate or create that thing of like people are calling for that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
I think it's food for thought.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would hate for everybody to have to go, okay, well, I just got to report back to Quinn, I had 2 phone calls today.
Yeah.
And have that really manual process be a part of your everyday life, that would suck. If there's nothing on because you guys are using the VoIP, because I heard soft phones. So
Oh, yeah, boy.
the VoIP process, I think there's reports that you can get off the DAS phone, whatever, to give you, here's how many phone calls you guys had to all your separate numbers. Especially if you're using the soft phone, because that's an additional charge.
Yeah, that's going to be a great Andrew question. And I also want to be really clear, to the extent you saw dollar numbers on there, we haven't made any internal decisions yet as to what we're going to do on that front or spend money on something. We are still, what I was simply excited about is that it's pretty rare. Keep in mind, we were almost going to do this in December already, that I have a brand new staff person ready to do this inside of 2 months on something that is a small part of his job description. He's primarily doing compliance work. So I was just pretty excited he got this far this quickly.
Yeah,
I wanted to at least give an update on, this is all still early stages in building, but it's like he's
things are happening, actually.
Yeah, I know, when I saw that in there, I was really impressed, and so, yeah, just fair warning, Martin, there's a lot of agencies larger than yours that are really looking into social media, and we don't have a lot of social media experts out there.
So be careful. I defense.
So, yeah, behind a locked door, that's what I'm kind of saying.
Yeah.
Or find a way to like, lease them out.
Well, I mean, it's also what's always been really painful for me, because I love engaging with the pipeline issues and quite frankly, the younger folks than the folks that are coming in the pipeline. And I feel like we're completely under-equipped because all I can offer them is a cell phone, a clunky website.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like we're communicating with them the way they're used to, and that's relevant to them.
Yeah,
And I would love to change that as quickly as possible.
the two comments that kind of came to my mind was when you were talking about, kind of who the stakeholders are. I think other boards of accountancy is another audience,
Yes.
that we have as well, which is cool. And I love the approachability concept. I mean, we're not unique in that our website and ASO's website, other state boards' websites are very like, we are a state agency. Thou shalt not come to us.
Cut and dry, that's what we are.
Yeah, I know. And so, yeah, I love it. Maybe we could become like the Wendy's, like social media people, you know, but
So Haley, I think like the first YouTube video we post is gonna be like the life of or day in the life of our chair.
oh, well, that's. You could just steal that.
Quit
from-
picking on her.
You can steal that from the OSCPA magazine this month, which is what's in there. My day on the life.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was great.
Yeah.
One other thought that I had, and maybe this would be more like newsletter-ish, is just, and I don't know if we can do this, but you know, stories like Anna Shula's story, the gal who worked for me, you know, who extended her one exam, like those types of things that I think could help that perception that we're like the heavy hand, but we can also be like, if you reach out to us, you know, we're practical and would like to work with you. You know, this resulted in her getting her exam taken care of, so.
And as chair of the NASPA Communications Committee, I appreciate you using the NASPA Communications Department.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's free. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Okay, Complaints Committee, BOAC, anything more from you on that, Ralph? Or Tanya?
No.
Not for me, the report's there, if there are any questions.
Great. Any questions? Proc, so we had a meeting just last week. You know, the committee continues to do really great work in their attendance and doing the oversight that they need. There is a little bit of a problem. We have to do some recruiting for that committee in that one member of the committee rolled off and another one is leaving public accounting, and so it's just not really a good fit for her anymore. So just it's two members at once on an already small committee. So there's going to be some recruiting that needs to happen for that committee. And then the annual report of the PROC is in the materials. They do a really nice job putting all that information together. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions on it.
One small asterisk, I have not had a chance to have any in-depth conversation with Haley on this, but just for the record, since we just talked about recruitment needs for PROC, we also have significant recruitment needs for BOAC, and I just want to put that out there. So I'm going to have to work with Haley in the interim quite a bit on, because we need fresh blood on the BOAC because of a number of transitions there as well, in addition to the PROC piece. So
How many people are typically on BOAC?
11, and I think we're down to, I think 7-ish right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is off the top of my head.
Okay, good to know.
That sounds about right.
Thanks, Tanya. Okay, ratification requests. So we will need a motion. It can be a single motion for both lists. The CPA certificates and permits and firm registrations. We don't have a muni list this time.
Yeah.
I make a motion to ratify the CPA certificates and firm registrations as presented.
Thank you, Jason Robinson.
Megan Hartley, second.
Great. Any discussion on these? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Haley Lyons, aye.
Royal Valdivia, aye.
Megan Hartley, aye.
Logan Steele, aye.
Jason Robinson, aye.
Joe Sullivan, aye.
Awesome. Thanks. Motion passes. Okay, that takes us to the end of the meeting. Any announcements? Martin's getting a phone call. Is it Ray? Okay, our next meeting is gonna be Thursday, June 5th. And I am now adjourning this public meeting of the Board of Accountancy. The time is now 12:41 PM.